In the last video, I suggested that this notion of male power and male privilege was one way of trying to get men to live up to their traditional gender role without undermining this push for equality between the sexes. And I absolutely think that's the case. In the introduction to the book, I asked the question, how do you get a free man to part with his rights and his resources? Well, you recast them as privileges that harm women and minorities. And I think this is the not so subtle, manipulative goal of this kind of thinking. And there are some very specific ways this is done in the context of divorce law. Now, there are some data sets. I shared some conflicting data sets in the book. There are some that show men doing worse than women. There are some that show women post-divorce do worse than men. And I don't necessarily disagree with those stats. I think this could have been one of the unintended consequences of no-fault divorce. Okay, well, how do you fix that problem? You can't admit that you made a mistake. You can't explicitly say that you want men to live up to their traditional gender role as providers. So what do? Well, you try to portray men as having all this power and privilege and trying to show that property distribution in the event of a dissolution is unfair to women and it unfairly advantages men. One of the articles that did this, there was, and I quoted this again in chapter 2, this was a Mary Ziegler, and this was entitled An Incomplete Revolution, Feminists and the Legacy of Marital Property Reform. In the article, she states, the history of marital property reform makes apparent the need for statutes and judicial decisions that define marital property more expansively. And she suggests that a, quote, wage-earning man's, quote, earning potential should be considered a marital asset subject to distribution in a divorce proceeding. So again, this is just a clever way of saying we should take even more money from men post-dissolution. And not because men should live up to their traditional gender role, but because allegedly they have these unfair advantages. So this is a perfect example of how this notion of power and privilege is used to hold men to traditional obligations without having the same expectations for women and without undermining this push for egalitarianism.